Hi everyone, welcome to week 2. This week we'll be discussing social constructionist theory and we'll be thinking about different ways of seeing. So a key focus of this course is to critically interrogate our assumptions, preconceived ideas, and notions of truth. So we'll be challenging the idea of a static, absolute, or objective truth, as if truth exists outside of the subjective or interpretive domain, and rather we'll be tracing how commonly assumed truths actually come from somewhere, how they become normalized as given facts, and are often invisible to those who benefit from them. In other words, we'll be examining what has become orthodox and comfortable in our lives. So this week we'll be orienting ourselves to this course by considering how knowledge and meaning is constructed. So we'll be discussing social constructionist theory, the philosophy that meaning is co-constructed in the relational domain between persons through language and symbols. So we'll pay attention to how certain images of humanity are maintained through relations between individuals and society, and how these relations inform our own subjectivities. And I'll go further into that word subjectivities in a few minutes. So we'll be thinking about how we're able to think and act in the world, who we are and who we might become based on our social positionings. So to do this week, in addition to the readings for Monday, by Saturday at 11:55 p.m., watch 2 videos that are posted on Moodle Week 2. One is called the Social Construction and Why It Matters, and the second is called Noticing Social Constructions, Buddy the Elf. And then you'll also be posting a response in the provocation forum. By Sunday at 11:55 p.m., respond to one other classmate's weekly post. So Gordon and Burns write that social constructionism acknowledges that knowledge and knowledge construction occur as a result of social processes, not as a result of not as a result of discovering objective, essential, and fixed truths about the world. So a central theme of this week is the idea that meaning doesn't come out of nowhere, nor is it neutral or static, but rather it's the ongoing effect of discourse. Discourses whereby a majority of people in a culture believe something to be true, and then this perceived truth then shapes collective understanding. So these social norms and expectations become visible when people fall outside of them. So the video clip this week from the movie Elf demonstrates how social norms become visible when somebody defies them. There are many examples of this that I'm sure you can imagine, but in this clip, Buddy's unexpected responses to commonplace events are considered abnormal, and thus to us as viewers are perceived as funny. So this is a very basic, simple example of a disruption in social norms. So, however, social norms and constructions are highly complex and have powerful effects on who one can be and become in society. Social constructions often exclude and oppress particular groups of people. So then we have to consider what happens then when people do not ascribe to social norms. How might these normativities exclude particular groups of people? What kind of worlds do these assumptions create? In education, we often see social and emotional curricula, which teaches expected behaviors to children to ensure their social acceptance and regulation. However, if we're taking a critical lens, we can wonder about what limitations this might create. And where does this construction of normalcy actually come from? What kinds of possibilities or inhibitions does it create? And who is privileged here? So in this way, social constructions create the worlds in which we live and the affordances certain people have within these worlds. So in Russell Bishop's foreword, he uses the phrase discursive positioning of the self. This phrase highlights the porosity and permeability of the self, not as a static individual existing in isolation of context, but rather a self that is actively negotiating her positionality amid the ebbs and flows of social discourses of gender, race, ability, socioeconomic status, etc. These are always in flux and being negotiated amid global and local political and economic movements. And this is what is meant by discursivity, the ways in which individuals are shaped and shape and respond to the complex flows of social, political, economic life, and how these factors influence our perceptions and ways of being in the world, how these phenomena affect how we think and then act. So subjectivity then is the way in which an individual self is relationally constructed, an identity and a way of being and knowing in the world that's actively informed by socio-political forces. The notion of subjectivity assumes that humans are not static or objective. We're not predetermined by purely biological truths. Rather, we are continuously in interaction with social systems and structures that create how we come to know and understand ourselves in the world, and what kind of lives we live and pursue in certain contexts. So education is very much a project in the making of subjectivities. As educators, we need to really consider how our ways of seeing, listening, and knowing the world have come from somewhere. That early childhood educators are implicated in the construction of worlds, and that children are subjects as well. So in this course, I invite you to take up a critical lens of the child, not as an innocent individual untainted from the social political milieu in which she lives, but rather a subject who is created within the unequal, racialized, and gendered hierarchies of education and of 21st century worlds. So I invite you to think critically about this term, subjectivity, and what kinds of conditions might be required if we as educators are to disrupt the notion of docility or docile bodies, moving through the structures of education without second thought, as it's described on page 11 of the text this week. So how might we pay attention to the underlying assumptions that guide commonplace practices in education? So on page 9 of our text this week, the authors speak about discourse. They define discourse as, quote, sets of statements, representations, and meanings that construct subjects and objects within particular social, historical, and cultural contexts. So in this course, when we use the word discourse, we're referring to a specific body of ideas or beliefs that are circulated through language and enacted. They're performed. Gender is an excellent example of this sort of discourse performativity. So in this week's video, we can see how gender is co-constructed through social gestures, symbols, and colors. So in taking up a social constructionist lens, the ways in which we understand ourselves are fundamentally relational and informed by our social contexts. Discourses give meaning to all aspects of our worlds. They also move with particular power relations. So where people are positioned and affected by dominant discourses is specific to the ways that they are located within their social context and within that discourse. So in watching this week's videos, you may have been considering some of the ways in which discourses of gender, race, sexuality, class, and ability privilege particular bodies over others. Yet, it's also important to highlight that these locations or positionalities are not fixed or static. Power relations and discourses are constantly shifting as humans move and reconfigure themselves within the world. Often these discourses are seemingly invisible and uphold normative assumptions. And those who fit into the dominant imaginary of expected social worlds may move more fluidly within and through society as opposed to someone who doesn't. So in this way, discourses operate at the conscious and subconscious level, and though sometimes we aren't aware of their presences, discourses influence how we understand ourselves and the measures we live up to.